Austin Collins lived in a small town located in northern Kentucky. By the age of 33, he had a good career and most of what he dreamed of during his school years. The man's childhood could hardly be called an easy one, and therefore, he returned to it in his thoughts from time to time. So it happened that day when the young businessman was making his coffee. He sat down at his kitchen table and plunged into memories. Then, almost 25 years ago, Austin lived alone with his father in a small old house, which overlooked the city landfill. The rent for the house in that area was very low, which was probably the reason why the single father, Charles Collins, rented it out. Austin didn't know much about his mother, only the fact that she died during childbirth, which was complicated by extensive internal bleeding. We should pay tribute to his father, who chose not to abandon his child and did everything he could to make sure his son didn't feel deprived of anything. However, the family didn't have much money, so Charles Collins had to spend most of his time at work. While Austin was young and went to daycare, the social inequality between him and his peers wasn't so obvious yet. But when the boy started school, the situation changed in the most dramatic way. Looking at the clothes that his classmates were wearing, Austin immediately realized that his father simply couldn't afford to get him the same kind of things. Charles Collins worked as a delivery man for a hardware store delivery service, spending his days transporting goods to all parts of the city and sometimes around the state. Despite the fact that this job required hard physical labor, the pay was definitely lower than one would expect. The money that Charles earned was barely enough for food. But he still had to pay rent and buy school supplies for Austin, who really enjoyed studying. Time passed, and Charles Collins continued to work as a delivery man, treating his duties with enviable zeal and responsibility. 10-year-old Austin was proud of his father and believed that he was doing an important job. Unfortunately, the boy's classmates didn't think so and often teased him, calling him a beggar's son. The most interesting thing was that Austin never told his classmates about his father's actual job. One day, Kevin Douglas, whose parents were wealthy business people, publicly announced that his father was the owner of a large real estate company. At that moment, Austin pulled his head into his shoulders and tried to disappear into the crowd of his peers. The boy was ashamed to admit to his classmates that his father worked as an ordinary delivery man, with a salary that was 10 times less than the salary of a businessman or an oilman. Austin knew that Father's Day was coming up and that the school was going to hold a celebration, which meant that his father would have to come to his school. At that moment, Kevin Douglas noticed the boy who was deliberately hiding from him behind the backs of his peers. "Hey Austin, what's your father's job? Like a janitor or a pizza delivery guy? Am I right?" exclaimed the rich man's son. Austin shuddered, but there was nowhere to hide, and he decided to take a desperate step. "My father is a businessman. He has several farms all over the state." Austin lied without batting an eye. "Yeah, right. Tell us more lies, please. Like that he has some kind of a car as a dad," Kevin exclaimed, not even attempting to hide the contempt in his voice. "Of course he has a car, and not just one," Austin answered, getting desperate. After the boy's words, the peers gasped admiringly, imagining a whole fleet of vehicles, which apparently Austin's father had. And only Kevin Douglas didn't hide his distrust and was sure that his classmate was lying and that his dad didn't even own a car at all. There was only 1 week left before Father's Day. For Austin, this meant only one thing: his deceit would soon be revealed. The realization that he would become the laughingstock of the whole school tormented the boy, forcing him to look fearfully at the calendar, which was methodically counting down the days. Austin was obviously miserable, unable to stop thinking about the ridicule he would have to soon endure. And then his father called him over and asked him what was going on. Austin lowered his eyes in embarrassment and quietly replied, "I'm in trouble, Dad. I really don't know what to do." Charles Collins nodded understandingly and hugged his son. "Remember, son, there are no problems in the world that can't be solved. My advice to you, try to worry less about unimportant things in life," the man added. "But I told Kevin Douglas that my father was a businessman with the whole garage of expensive cars. Do you get it?" Austin exclaimed without hiding his despair. Having heard what his son's problem was, Charles Collins' face immediately changed and he got to thinking. Austin's heart was beating faster than usual, and he followed his father's every move, sincerely hoping that he would find a way out of his predicament. Finally, a smile appeared on Charles's face, and his eyes seemed to have lit up. "I know how to help you, son. Just go to the celebration and don't worry about anything. Trust me, I'll take care of it." His father's response was undoubtedly the best news Austin got in the last few days. The boy didn't feel alone anymore, and even if his classmates were to learn the truth, it would be much easier to survive the shame. Of course, Austin realized that it was highly unlikely that his father would find a new job in such a short time, which meant that he wouldn't be able to find a car to drive to his school either. The boy spent the rest of the days between the big celebration anxiously waiting to see what his father came up with. Austin would have done anything to rewind the time and not lie to Kevin Douglas. Finally, Father's Day had come, and hundreds of children of the city took part in its celebration. Sports competitions were held in schools, and as soon as the winners were announced, they were followed by intellectual competitions and trivia games. Many of the parents of Austin's classmates had already come to the celebration, and only Charles Collins was late for some reason. All the while, Kevin Douglas stared at Austin with undisguised triumph. The poor boy was waiting for his deceit to be exposed at any minute. And just when everyone had already decided that Charles Collins wasn't coming, a Dodge SUV with tinted windows pulled up to the school parking lot. Who could that be? I thought everyone was already here. The parents and the kids kept asking quietly. And then the car door swung open and a man dressed in a business suit stepped out. Austin took a closer look and almost fainted when he realized who that was. The man behind the wheel of the expensive Dodge turned out to be none other than Charles Collins. "Dad! Daddy!" Austin shouted and rushed to greet his father. Charles definitely made a splash with the entrance. Kevin Douglas was especially impressed. It seemed as though the boy completely lost his ability to speak. Meanwhile, Charles hugged his son, and they went inside together to take part in the rest of the celebration. At the same time, the man was behaving as if nothing special had happened, and he had always been a successful businessman, and not just a delivery man. When the celebration ended, he said a polite goodbye to all those present and headed for the car. "Dad, are we going home in this Dodge?" Austin asked admiringly. "Of course, son. Sit down and don't forget your seatbelt and keep your questions for later," the man answered with a smile. Charles didn't say a single word on their way home. It wasn't until they pulled up outside a 2-story house on Main Street that Austin realized what was really going on. His father's boss lived in that mansion. He greeted them at the gates with a joyful smile on his face. "Did everything go as planned, Charles?" Thomas White asked. "Yes, sir. Thank you. If it weren't for your help, I wouldn't have been able to pull it off," Charles said, handing over the keys to their rightful owner. Thomas smiled and shook the employee's hand. The businessman always appreciated Charles, who had been working for him for several years and was one of the best employees of the company. That was why Thomas White agreed to help Charles out and let him borrow his suit and his car for his son's celebration. On their way home, Austin kept stopping every now and then to thank his father for being so understanding and for his help. For the first time in his life, the boy realized that his father was the most important person in his life. He was willing to go to great lengths to save his son's reputation at school and preserve the honor of the family. And now, many years later, Austin Collins couldn't hold back his tears remembering that incident. Despite the fact that it had been 25 years already and that his father had long passed away, the young businessman still honored his memory. Every year, on his Father's Day, Austin went to his grave and bought a mourning wreath. And that was what he did that day. After his trip down memory lane, the businessman went to the city cemetery. Having found his father's grave, Austin knelt before it and whispered, "I got it all, Daddy. I have my own family and a big house now. My son will be going to school soon, and he is very proud that his grandfather was a delivery man." Tears were rolling down the businessman's face, bringing him some relief. Austin would have gladly given up on all of his wealth, only to have his father still be alive. There was only one thing the businessman knew for sure. It was that he would raise his son the same way his father raised him many years ago. Looking at Austin's success, it's safe to say that he will fulfill his mission honorably, and that Charles Collins will always be proud of his son, even from heaven.